through.
Order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday the 20th of March 2025. Sellafield in Cumbria is the UK's largest and most hazardous nuclear site. It previously generated electricity and produced plutonium for the UK's nuclear deterrence, but is now being decommissioned, which is targeted for 21-25, with a price tag of 136 billion. Our predecessor committee reported last on Sellafield in 2018, when it found that most of the major projects were significantly delayed, with combined cost overruns then of 913 million. It also found that neither the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, the public body in charge of Sellafield, nor the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the sponsoring department at the time, were holding Sellafield to account effectively. So today, we will all be examining the progress that Sellafield has made in addressing the most significant hazards and decommissioning the site, and challenge the NDA and DESNZ on the effectiveness of their oversight of Sellafield. And at this point, I'd like to thank you, David, Peattie, and your team very much for hosting the committee when we visited you recently. So thank you very much to you, and if you'd extend our thanks to the staff, please.
Yes, I will do, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. So to help us with all of that, firstly I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Bill Esterson, Chairman of the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee, who is guesting at today's session. Bill, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
From the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, we have Clive Maxwell, CB, Second Permanent Secretary, and Clive's been Permanent Secretary at DESNZ and its predecessor, BEIS, since November 2022?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. We've also got Lee McDonough, Director General of the Net Zero and Nuclear and International. Lee has been Director General of DESNZ and its predecessor, BEIS, since June 21.
Correct.
Yeah. Welcome. And from the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, David Peattie, who's well known to this committee, the Group Chief Executive Officer, and David was appointed CEO in 2017. Kate Bowyer, Group Chief Financial Officer. Kate joined NDA as Group CFO in May 2023. Yes, good, great. And finally, from Sellafield, Euan Hutton, the Chief Executive Officer. Euan was named Interim CEO in July 23 and became permanent in November 24. So I think a warm welcome to Kate and Euan as it's first time in front of this committee. Very good, nice to see you both. So, without any further ado, we will launch straight into our questions, please. And the first question comes from Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I'd just like to start by asking a few brief questions to you, Mr. Peattie. The whole part of the questioning is really about whistleblowing. Do you have a group-wide whistleblowing policy?
Yes, we do. And over the last 2 years, I have appointed a new role, which is the Group Head of Ethics and Compliance. She's actually in the meeting today with us. And I thought this was a really important thing to do so that we can have a standard approach across the whole of the NDA, and maybe we'll get into the discussion about how the NDA is constructed later. Since the creation of one NDA, where we brought everything in-house over the last 5 years, it does allow us to have standardisation across all parts of the NDA. And one area that's particularly important to me is that we have a standard approach to Speak Up, which is the name we give to the anonymous line where people can raise any concerns. There's also many other things we've put in place as well. I've introduced something called ethics ambassadors across the group. We have 45 volunteers from different parts of the NDA whose role is to be there as a first contact for people who have specific concerns. And then finally, I'll just observe, we have a live survey at the moment, and we're very happy to share the details of that, where we are showing signs of improvement. Of course, we're not where we need to be in this whole area. I'm certainly not complacent. We do still have, I think, concerns that get raised, but I hope the committee is reassured we do take it incredibly seriously.
I'm sure we'll come back in the main hearing to some of the more general points. I just also wanted to specifically understand the use of non-disclosure agreements. Are they used across the group? And if so, how many have there been used at Sellafield in recent years?
I don't have the specific details of that. I think as a principle we tend not to use non-disclosure agreements. There may be occasional instances where they may be done, but I don't have
well, perhaps
the
you
details.
could write to the
we can
committee
write
and
to you with
just
the
provide
details.
the detail about that. I'd like now just to turn to the case of my constituent, Alison McDermott. The majority of what I'm about to say is already in the public domain, but for the benefit of the doubt, I don't believe that anything I'm about to say relates to live legal proceedings, and therefore but I will invoke parliamentary privilege if needed. So Alison is an experienced qualified HR and EDI specialist. She's over 25 years working at a senior level. She's done board level consultancy for major firms like Google, Vodafone, to name a few. So she was headhunted to work with Sellafield and NDA, first as a consultant via Capita for 18 months. And given her excellent performance, it seems she was hired directly by Sellafield in 2016. After submitting a report into systemic bullying and harassment at the organisation, she was let go of. I understand that at that time you didn't invoke your whistleblowing policy or take a statement as required by your own policy. Instead, you spent some $750,000 on legal fees. Perhaps you would confirm that. You refused mediation for 3 years and pursued Alison for costs twice and lost on both occasions. As you'll know, the remit of this committee is concerned with the proper ethical use of public funds. And so I would, as the new CEO, Mr. Hutton, ask you, do you think this was a good use of public money?
I think you're absolutely right. As a public body, we are responsible for spending public money as well as we can. I believe that at the moment there is still leave to appeal against the most recent ruling regarding costs. So I don't necessarily wish to get into the detail of a specific case as an individual.
So obviously I'm not going to speak about any current legal proceedings in this case, but it is I suppose, using public money to pursue employment tribunals to that degree. I mean, taking the general point, would you say that is a good use of public money?
I think when you are a public body and you are taken to those things, you have to do what you can to protect the integrity of the process and therefore the spending of that money. One of the things I think that I would just like to pull on is around about 2017. And the time at which these proceedings began, we did have a staff survey, and David mentioned the one that's just recently concluded, which indicated that we had some areas we wanted to improve on. Absolutely. And over the last, 7, 8 years now, we've made really big strides forward in addressing some of the issues that were at that time. Now, you might say I would say that, but in the most recent staff survey, which just concluded, I think, a fortnight ago, I only say I think because I just can't remember if it was a fortnight ago, we've seen significant improvement, not just in the number of people being part of that survey. It's gone up to 78% of the staff itself. We've also seen increases of over 5 percentage points in engagement scores and also in the diversity and inclusion and wellbeing scores. So the sorts of things that we did from that time have really had an impact. So
I think this is survey data which you sent to me personally yesterday afternoon, which, as it's marked official, I assume is appropriate to draw upon in this hearing. So I have shared it with fellow members of the committee, and I'm sure we will all want to come to some more detailed questioning. But before I do that, I don't want to move away from the fact that you recognise that the work that Alison did during her both 18 months as a consultant and then time as an employee, did highlight issues that were of major public, I think, interest in terms of a culture of bullying and harassment that was pretty endemic in Sellafield in particular. And I think, I've seen the treatment of other whistleblowers, which similar to the treatment of my constituent, which has serious detriment to health, mental health, and indeed professional reputation. Alison, as you probably recognise, is sitting here in the public gallery. And I recognise that, you're not willing to say very much. I'm disappointed in that, because I think most of this is historic and in the public domain. But I do just wonder if you might at least apologise to her for the way that she's been treated by Sellafield.
I think as I said, at the time, we undertook that staff survey and learned an awful lot. And from then, we've done, and I can list the number of things. I think it's some of the information we sent you that demonstrates that we absolutely take all these things very, very seriously. And as a result, we've had an improvement in terms of an anonymous managed survey, which demonstrates that we are getting better on a number of things. We're not complacent. We've got a lot to do.
And just to establish, what role were you in at the time that initial report was done in 2017?
At that time, I was the Environment, Health, Safety and Quality Director.
Okay, so you're in a safety critical role. So my own background is working on patient safety in the NHS. Indeed, I'm Vice Chair of the APPG Patient Safety. I hope you will agree with me that it's critical to safety that there is a culture where people at all levels feel safe to speak up. And I just wondered if you thought that the way that Sellafield dealt, with this case would encourage or hinder other people from speaking up.
I think it's a very well put question, because this connection between ability to speak up and raising safety concerns is one that I'm quite confident that we have robust processes, and I'll just explain in two ways. Excuse me. Under the nuclear site licence, which we have as a licensee, one of the conditions is that you have to have robust processes for reporting issues, safety concerns and other off-normal conditions. And we do have that. That is a licence condition that is monitored by the ONR, and the most recent intervention on that, we got a green rating. We raise around 800 off-normal condition reports every week. Around about 150 to 200 of those are specific safety issues, and they might be very small ones to do with a hazard spotting, up to potentially the failure of a piece of equipment. So we've got the evidence that shows that we have got a really good reporting culture, and especially around safety and nuclear safety issues.
Well, I'm going to come back later, I think, and challenge whether these problems have really completely gone away. I don't think I heard an apology, but I hope you'll at least agree to meet with me and my constituent Alison. And I know Chair will come back to these issues of safety and culture in the main hearing.
Can I just say, I have Hinckley A, B and C in my constituency, and I recently visited all three of them. I had absolutely wonderful visits to Hinckley A and B, and I'd like to put on record the name Nicola Favell, who runs Hinckley B. She was immaculate. She knew her staff, she knew the problems. And Mark Pitts, who unfortunately suffered a heart attack on the day I was visiting at Hinckley A. But I would generally say that from whistleblowing constituents that I have, not related to Hinckley A and B, but still related to other areas of the Hinckley site, there is generally a problem with whistleblowing and a safety culture. And to that end, my office has submitted an environmental regulation request because of that connection between bullying and safety, particularly within a nuclear context.
Okay, we've got that on the record. Are we done?
You, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I just say very gently to our NDA team, Anna was sent that information yesterday, should have really been sent to the whole committee. We received your letter about which we will again be coming on to the replacement and analytical projects, amongst other things, I think only yesterday. There's some pretty detailed information in there. I think in courtesy to committee members in future, please can we make sure we have this sort of information in a little bit more timely manner.
Yes, Chair, understood.
Thank you. I'd like to start. This is a difficult, big, complex, expensive project. And I wonder whether we should rethink the way that we actually deal with it. We know that we're here in 2025. We know that you want to completely decommission the site at Sellafield in 100 years' time, in 21-25. What I would like to see, please, is a graph or with a straight line on it. Here we are, 2025. Here we are at 21, 25. How are we going to get from A to B? What are the steps? When do they need to be taken? And we know that this whole thing has increased by 136 billion in 1 year alone, the total estimated cost of decommissioning. I'd like to see some vague costings on each of those processes, so that when you come before us in 5 years' time, we can say, well, not only have you not done this stage, but therefore where is the rest of the programme in terms of decommissioning? Would it be possible to rethink the whole thing in those terms?
Yes, I think it would, Chair, and we'd be happy to provide a sketch as you have described. I mean, I think I would emphasise just the figures you quoted. The bulk of that change is around the discounting effect. But Kate can talk about the actual underlying increase, and there has been an underlying increase in the estimate of cost. And it is an estimate stretching out to 100 years. So a small change in an estimate for 1 year multiplied by 100 is one of the reasons why it can have a very large effect. But you're quite right, having a look to be able to look over 100 years at the big steps we need to accomplish within the current policy guidelines and intent to leave the site for future alternative use, which I'm sure we'll get on to later, is one of the reasons why the figures are so high.
I get that, David. We have, in this committee, had discussions on the whole of government accounts about this whole business, about discounting. What we're interested in is the trend of real costs. We know that your real costs this year got up by, is it 2.7 billion in 1 year? And if you extrapolate that over 100 years, I think that's going to put quite a significant effect on the cost of the whole thing. So if we could get into, what this committee will be doing is keeping a very close eye on how much the whole thing is costing, increased costs each year, and the reasons for that. So moving on, as Sellafield has missed its targets for retrieving waste and turning other waste into glass in recent years, how will you meet targets 24-25 at the start of the year?
So if I could make a couple of introductory comments and then perhaps ask Euan to talk in the detail about the specifics. I think it's important to note that the so-called legacy ponds and silos at Sellafield, which involve storing material over the last 70 years, from first the Cold War weapons programme support and then the Magnox period of nuclear reactors. Those ponds and silos were designed not with the ultimate intention of cleaning them and emptying them. The context was very different in the immediate post-war period in the UK as it was internationally, and at the time it was urgent to get material prepared, and therefore the silos and the ponds. And it's only in the last few years that the technical solutions have been able to be defined of how on earth we will get, and some of this committee have visited the Magnox Swarf storage silo, which is the most hazardous building in the UK, and you've seen the scale of the activity and the complexity of the activity, which I think it is worth noting. We have understandably set some targets. It's important to set targets so that people are motivated to try and achieve them, but as the report rightly says, we have largely missed those targets. We've suffered from basic stuff like cranes not operating to the level of efficiency that they should do, but also because these are first-of-a-kind projects, incredibly complex. And I'd finish off by saying, if I can put it this way, the asymmetry of risk and reward is off the scale with this material. This is the most hazardous material in the world. We have 140 tonnes of plutonium at Sellafield. And MSSS, the Magnox Swarf storage silo, as I say, is the most hazardous building in the UK. If we get something wrong with the retrievals there, the consequences are catastrophic. And so the caution that we apply, I think, is absolutely appropriate. And therefore, we will, I think, from time to time, miss the target, which are understandably ambitious. And this may sound like a load of excuses, I know, but it's meant to point out what we're dealing with here is so extreme in its hazard to the natural environment and to humankind that we rightly believe we should be super, super cautious. It's going to take several decades to empty these ponds and silos, and we should continue to set targets, but I will certainly not over-criticise Euan and the team if they miss a target because they put a focus more on safety of our workforce and the natural environment than achieving what, after all, is an arbitrary a priori target set at the start of the year. So I may offer that, Chair, and then perhaps if
Euan, yes.
So just a couple of things. Yeah, in terms of the silos, although we have two silos, some of you who came and visited, we stood on one. We have another silo next door. We met the production target this year for that second silo. So in its sort of second year of operation after a pretty difficult first year, new equipment and whatever else, we've delivered on the target for 18 containers out of that facility. And that's a facility that the waste went...
Which facility are we talking about?
Sorry, it's called the biofuel cladding silo. We've got a terrible habit of turning that into...
Which, if you look at figure 9, you didn't deal with any boxes in 21-2 or 22-3 and only one box in 23-4. So
that's correct.
Well behind schedule.
So we've now delivered to the target this year, which is really great news and a real boon for the team in there who have worked tirelessly to get to that point. The other thing, just in terms of how we set these targets, and I'll use the phrase an S-curve. An S-curve is exactly what it looks like on a graph. When you start something new, your numbers are going to be very low. You get into proper throughput, your numbers are where they need to be. So the target next year on the biofuel cladding silo, we delivered 18 this year. Minimum next year is something like 57, and I want 90. Now, you might say, well, how are you going to get from 18 all the way up? We've demonstrated you can fill a container in about 5 hours. So what then you're genuinely into is operational efficiency. So it's how quickly you can get a container, how quickly you can manage it into the store. Excuse me. Also, I just want to draw attention to the progress that we've made in the, I call it special nuclear material, call it plutonium. This year we've delivered on all the targets in that part of the business, to the point where the regulator has cleared off 2 level 1 issues, one to do with the packages and one to do with the storage. So we are making really good progress, just not everywhere, and we need to get better everywhere.
So, I mean, this committee, having visited some of us on several occasions, fully understands the safety issues you've got there and the difficulties you've got there. So how, Mr. Peattie, do you balance those safety issues with the need to provide value for money and meet this 100-year straight line that we've now established we're going to do? Sometimes to me, it sort of seems to me that the culture is, oh, this is so difficult, it's so dangerous, almost as sort of... paralyses. It paralyses. Thank you very much. That was exactly the word I was looking for. So how do you balance these different aspects, bearing in mind that you've got the regulator sitting over at the top of you, who I think you're in very close touch with most of the time, who will certainly soon call you out if you're doing anything that's not safe. So you have a bit of a safety net in a second opinion all the time. So how do you balance the two issues?
Thank you. It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We work in very close partnership with the Office for Nuclear Regulation, who obviously regulates Sellafield as it does our other nuclear sites, but also the technical teams who are on the front line, day in, day out, figuring out how we're going to retrieve the material from these ponds and silos. And getting that balance right is this constant iteration of listening to what the next short-term challenge will be, whether that's a broken crane or an improvement in the shift patterns, with the long-term goal of emptying these silos once and for all, as I said earlier, which will take several decades in some cases. So incrementing in slowly with the end goal in mind is how we do that balance, with this constant checking with the frontline teams. You know, are you still operating within the framework that was agreed with the project? You know, are you today doing something that hasn't been done before? And if that's the case, then we'll stop. There'll be a special safety brief around that particular task, again in conjunction with the regulators who are on site pretty much permanently. And then just incrementally moving forward like that. And as Euan rightly says, being able to then to really to crawl before we can walk, and then walk before we can run up the S-curve that he described.
There are some things on that line you can control, but there are other things you can't control. Right. And the things you can't control are extra duties that the department is loading on you. Things like the AGR decommissioning material, things like the government's decision now to put the plutonium beyond use, which presumably impose quite a lot of extra work on your organisation.
They do, but we do welcome the AGR decommissioning. I think that the NDA is the right body to do that on behalf of the UK. And we may get into the structure of the NDA later in this hearing, but that is handled in a different division of the NDA, separate from Sellafield. Sellafield's only role at the moment...
Material will come to Sellafield eventually. The
material will come to Sellafield eventually, and in fact, the spent fuel comes today from the EDF stations currently generating nuclear power for all of us. So we do have a role there in helping to keep the lights on.
You haven't quite answered my question. How much extra work are those two items in themselves putting on your organisation within the next 100 years? Well,
again, because it is in the next couple of years, so the first, absent the day-to-day refuelling and defuelling, which we've been handling for years, and that's well handled by Euan and his team, the first transfer of a currently generating station will be Hunterston B, and that will be about a year from now. So we do have time to prepare. And as I said earlier, it's in a different division of the NDA. The plutonium disposition decision, recently taken by this government, which I wholeheartedly support, will, again, in time lead to further activity at Sellafield, but several years away again. So I think Sir Geoffrey, my big answer, the bottom line, my answer is we have time to prepare, and different teams will be working. We are absolutely focused, and we do not disturb the activity of these teams on the front line, cleaning out these silos. These are, after all, the intolerable risks that we face.
I suppose, Sir Geoffrey, what...
No, we must have a bit of order, Rachel, please.
Sorry.
If you want to ask a question...
I will.
Yes, Clive, please.
Yeah, back at targets. Do you think you've undermined yourselves by producing targets over the years when you really knew you couldn't hit them?
Well, we've set very ambitious targets in areas that are first of a kind delivery. So I think in a way I'm partly agreeing with the notion that you're suggesting. I mean, are there areas where we should not be targeting, or should we be targeting something other than the number of skips removed? Because whilst it's a very simple, easily understood target, as I said earlier, there's so many other aspects of it, of building capability, and the risk of getting it wrong is huge. So I just wonder whether we should be more sophisticated in how we set these targets, rather than the rather obvious ones of how many buckets you can fill a day.
In the end, the public wants to know, we as their representatives want to know, when this material will be made safe. And that's the sort of targets you've been setting and not hitting. So again, back to the point, should you actually be looking more carefully when you set targets and maybe putting caveats on them very clearly, or having different levels of target? Because some targets really, when you just explained earlier, are what ministers call aspirations. In other words, they're a general figure they can talk about, but they haven't really got any ability to achieve it.
I think that's a fair comment.
I think Clive, Maxwell...
Could I just come in here? Because I think you asked a good question about how you set targets around something that's first of a kind, where you're trying something for the first time. In my experience, the important thing is to be clear about what assumptions you're making, about what you're going to find when you start that first of a kind activity. For me, one of the positive things that comes through in this report from the NAO is the fact that actually, although some of the rates of output have not been where they should be, actually what it's shown is the proof of concept that the activities that the NAO and Sellafield have been seeking to do to start to clear out wastes or ponds or silos have been shown they can do it. I think across all of these activities, they've managed to do those first unloads or to get the work going. So in terms of starting on that S-curve that Euan described, the start's been made, and that for me is the sort of the really important progressive sign.
I'll probably come back to Euan Hutton then and say, should we be having two levels of target then? One saying we've got a target here to actually prove we can do things in a certain way, and a second target about how much we can do and when.
Well, we kind of do. We have basket measures. So a basket measure. If you look at MSSS, or the Magnox, storage silo, which we visited, we talked about putting in the capability to get to the next phase of the retrievals. That's one of my targets this year. So there's a project to put in place the next thing that I need. In the first generation Magnox storage pond, I had a combination of targets of getting units out, and I think we were there when we actually saw one leave, which was great. It was just fortuitous we were there at that point. But some of the other things in that particular basket of measures are the things like installing a high volume pump on another piece of the facility. So we try and do that. We also play into the space of things called key decommissioning milestones, which are agreed with the regulator. We talked about how the regulator gets involved. But again, I'll go back to the licence. So the nuclear site licence condition 35 says you've got to have a decommissioning plan. So we agree key decommissioning milestones under that plan, but some of those will be finish emptying MSSS by 2060. Now, clearly that's something that's so far in the future, how do you measure against it? So we have two levels below that, key performance measures and key performance indicators, which are shorter term. So the targets that were set with the NDA help us to demonstrate progress towards meeting those licence condition agreed.
Again, they're aspirations, aren't they?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, aspiration against an absolute need, though. So that's how I'd put that.
But you mentioned the Magnox Wharf silo, storage silo. The figures we were given are that by the mid 2030s, the optimistic scenario is you'll be retrieving 546 boxes of waste each year, which is 24 times the figure achieved in 23-24. I mean, that doesn't sound feasible, does it? I mean, is this an aspiration that's not even a realistic aspiration?
Because by the mid-30s, I'll have 3 machines. At the moment, I'm using 1 machine in its early days. I'll have 3 machines by then.
And there's a certainty
that will give us the capability that we need to be able to meet the KDM.
Okay, I mean, I just worry that some of these targets are predicated on everything going right. I mean, we went to the side of the ponds. I mean, I think visual impressions are as strong as anything when you're looking at this. And you look at the antiquated state of some of the equipment. You look at pipes that are rusting. We went past a lead sheeting to protect people from radiation because there were leaks in the tanks. We were told there were leaks in the ground from some of the tanks. I mean, this is a situation which doesn't actually inspire confidence in that everything's going to work.
So that you've touched on two well understood different issues, which are actually the things that drive us to get on with the task.
That didn't quite fill me with confidence either, that answer, Mr. Hutton. I mean, so these are challenges. This is equipment that is failing. These are the infrastructure that's failing. That's going to affect your performance, isn't it? It's going to mean that you can't deliver these very high-level targets you're setting yourselves.
The sorts of so there's the structures, and then there's the equipment. Some of the equipment that you've mentioned isn't equipment that we use today, so that's redundant equipment. The challenge we've got, sorry, my voice is giving out, I do apologise. The challenge that we've got is where the two connect. It's the modern equipment that we put in and where we can plug it in, because it's an old facility, to make sure we can get the throughput that we need. So the lead sheeting covers a construction crack that's been there from the start. It's not getting any worse. And the other area is the original building leak, which we've discussed at length before.
I think Liam wants.
She did. I just wanted to sort of say from the department's perspective, the way that we think about this, we work very closely with David and with Euan and with the regulators to set a challenging set of targets, but they are underpinned by an understanding of what is a realistic scenario, even though they are challenging scenarios. And one of the things I just want to say about the risk versus progress point that you rightly pointed out, we do have a group which is called the G6. I don't know why it's called the G6 other than the fact there's 6 of us, but that is where we come together with the ONR, the Environment Agency, UKGI as the shareholder, my department, NDA and Sellafield, to look specifically at where there are very difficult risk judgments to be made, where we can balance the imperative to move forward quickly to deal with an intolerable risk, whilst understanding what the implications are from a hazard side. So the Magnox swarf silos are a really good example of where we collectively, with the regulator, looked at what's the best way to move forward, because as you're uncovering these challenges, you have to respond to them in the way that David said, making sure these very hazardous materials are cared for. So I just wanted to sort of say from our perspective, we do have a comprehensive process.
When you set targets or aspirations, would it not be helpful if alongside them you said these can only be delivered if these particular challenges and problems are actually addressed, which might mean the department providing some more resources to enable equipment to be updated, improved, or faults to be rectified?
So I think the governance that we have in place, which is comprehensive, I can go through it now or later, does mean we do try to do that balance between understanding what the assumptions that are being made when we go through business case approvals in our internal governance, which Clive chairs. We very much look at the assumptions that are being made in order to get the balance right between what we are spending, the pace at which we can move, and managing the risk overall.
Would it be helpful if those assumptions, the requirements which are needed to hit these targets, were made more public?
I mean, look, the targets need to be set in line with the resources that are available. I completely agree with you. And I know that's the process that goes on. The NDA and the Sellafield boards set targets on the basis of what their budgets are for the year ahead and periods beyond that. And so they need to be connected in that sort of way, yes. And if there are a set of assumptions that could be drawn out better, I'll take that point away. I think that's useful about what things need to be in place in order to achieve those goals.
So Clive, as the Permanent Secretary, presumably you are responsible within the department for signing off all these costs.
I chair the department's investment committee, which takes the place of the accounting officer, supports the accounting officer in checking that the business cases for the investment decisions are stand up and that they provide value for money and are appropriate.
Is it you or is it the Permanent Secretary, the first Permanent Secretary, that actually signs off these business cases?
Business cases are signed off by the NDA's accounting officer. The department has to approve them, and I do that in chairing the committee. Ultimately, ministers sign off on these things as well, I should add.
Of course. Yeah. I just challenge you to challenge Sellafield on this point. I mean, what we in this committee deal with figures, we deal with targets, and the whole issue that we've been talking about, and the reason that my deputy is so rightly probing this, is that if you go to figure 8, this whole matter is now 13 years delayed since you originally set a target in 2018. Now that's a huge delay, and it doesn't give this committee much confidence that when we're told what the targets are, that they are actually realistic targets. What we want to see on this committee is we don't mind, what the target is, but we want to be absolutely clear that it's realistic and it's going to be carried out in the time scale that has been set out. And I don't think we're getting that from this sort of example.
Well, we need to make sure that the targets that are being set are commensurate with the resources and the budgets that are available. I think we also need to recognise the fact that we're dealing with first-of-a-kind activities and that there will be occasions where targets are set where it turns out that the assumptions on which they're based about, for example, the materials that will be found in some of these silos or ponds turn out to be different from those that were expected, or the operating conditions are more difficult, and that will impact on some of these. There are also some of these targets that have been impacted over that particular period by COVID and by the impacts that had on some of the operational activities at Sellafield. But yes, I agree with you.
I hope we're going to get away from this excuse of COVID, all of you, before too long.
This covers a period including 2019 and 2020 and 2021.
It won't be an excuse going forward.
It won't be.
David Peattie.
I think you're pushing on a really important area for us, and I'm taking away two things from this. The use of ranges is perhaps more appropriate here for us, where at the top of the range we should really lay out the optimistic assumptions that have been put in place. And we can do a better job, I think, of laying out the assumptions at the top of the range, the optimistic case, and if you like, at the bottom of the range, where we should be confident in delivery. And with that, we because I understand the point, of course I do.
That's a really helpful answer. Perhaps accompanying those ranges would be the assumptions that they're made on. So if all of these, the following, go right, it will be in the bottom end of the range. However, if the obsolescence we find more obsolescence, the crane track needs replacing, which is going to be very difficult to do, it will be towards the top end of the range. And I think that sort of narrative would give us, it's a sort of basic sort of, as my deputy says, transparency issue that this committee and the public would expect to see. Thank you very much. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I was going to ask if there was a more sophisticated approach that could be taken to setting targets, which I think we've just covered off with the last round of questioning. One thing that was a concern, David, was when you said that if safety were an issue, which meant that Euan was going to miss a target, he wouldn't be chastised for that. I mean, I would presume it's axiomatic that in setting targets, that safety is going to be a big element of it. So, I'm sure that was your intention. So, in terms of reorganising the way that targets are set and performance is measured, what sort of process are you going through to do that, and what kind of time frames have you got to sort of setting a new regime of measurement?
Well, we set annual targets for each of the operating companies within the end. There are 4 of them, of which Sellafield is one. So there'll be a basket of measures, milestones and metrics for a financial year. So one coming up now, starting next month. And we do that in, again, an iterative discussion with Euan and his executive team, and me and my central executive team. And we consult with the department as well, so that they're comfortable overall with the scale of the targets, so they're not either too difficult or too easy. And then it's a matter of quarterly monitoring those, making adjustments in year where necessary, as we reset. So set them annually, track them quarterly, and have them really bespoke to the particular area or site or business within the end.
I guess you've got a balance of the short-term issues and building the long-term capacity as well.
Exactly right, yeah. And so some of the targets will be about enabling works, whether that's for infrastructure, for future capability, and some targets will just simply about operational output. The AGR fuel, for instance, advanced gas core reactors, the EDF, we have a very clear target, and we're doing well this year on achieving that. That is one of the areas we earn revenue for the taxpayer. We earn about £1 billion a year. So we're not just a draw on the public funds, but we are able to generate that. And we're an important part of the nuclear sector to build confidence in the potential for new nuclear for SMRs, for gigawatt. The waste ultimately from Hinkley C will at some point come through Sellafield. So we do. You're absolutely right. We set a mixture of short and medium and long-term targets for all our businesses.
And for the committee's reassurance, that's being double-checked or scrutinised.
Yeah. So look, I mean, we've got 3 really important pillars around the governance and controls here. The first is we've got corporate board structures. The NDA is a company, Sellafield is a company. You've got corporate structures, as in any sort of other big sort of complex corporate organisation which deal with things like health and safety and the like. They're also the licensed entities. The second pillar you've got here is about the government's role, some of the disciplines that flow through managing public money, the sorts of things this committee cares about, and a series of other controls in that space. And then the third really important pillar here is the pillar about the regulator, in particular the ONR in this case, that deals with conventional health and safety at these sites, as well as the nuclear risks, but also the Environment Agency and others, some other sites. Those 3 things all need to come together. All 3 of those organisations, sets of controls and governance are involved in the setting of the targets on an annual basis. I think the thing that this report refers to, and that Chair's already raised is the importance of locking those and nesting them into a longer term set of goals, so you can understand the progress you're making not just within the year, where there will be ups and downs, but also the progress you're making against those medium and longer term plans. And I think that's something where there is more work to be done, as this report says.
And if I could just add to, on the governance side, we do have comprehensive governance in place. So I brought it with me. We have a pack of performance. We review informal meetings on a quarterly basis and some on a monthly basis. And then we have many, many connections if there's any issues that arise. That's why the relationships are so important.
I think something to watch, and I get that there's a learning process, but as you're learning about what targets to set and what targets are realistic, SMART we used to call it back when I did my training and all.
We still do that.
Yeah, is actually if those performance targets keep shifting as you're learning about what the demands are on the business, then actually you haven't got a baseline to see if there's improvement, because you're revising your own targets all the way through. So it's sort of getting to a point, and that comes back to what you were saying, David, about a more sophisticated approach, where actually you've got a pretty steady baseline, so you can see, quarterly or yearly, that the improvements are happening. So how far off that are we?
So I think, for me, it comes back to, David and Euan should speak, just from my perspective, it goes back to the point that Clive was making earlier. Now we have Sellafield has successfully retrieved material from the 4 legacy ponds. That's your baseline, and actually what you're then shifting into, you can do it now. So it's like, how do you actually maximise the operation, and whether that's using AI and digital techniques to look at how you stack things in a skip, which is what's happening in the swarfs, in the swarf silos. And so actually, until you're confident you can remove the material, it's really hard to sort of focus on the sort of improvement bits.
I think that's absolutely right, Lee. And again, you're pushing on a really important topic here of once we're into a steady state, repeating actions then that we should see some improvement in efficiency. But there'll be uncertain events that we can't predict as well, which we need to build in some contingency for that.
Every meeting I sit in now, AI gets mentioned.
No, you're absolutely right, Peter, and well done with your excellent questions. We now move, please, to Chris Kane.
Thank you, and Euan and team, thank you for a very, very informative visit to Sellafield. It was good to see it, and thank you for your candid approach when we were there. David, do you mind if I just quickly go back to your opening line about you'll never criticise Sellafield for missing targets if given the type of waste and the safety issues. If you don't mind, a sort of blunt observation from me, that seems like a very unsophisticated answer to a very sophisticated issue. I would hope that the level of safety involved and the level of danger would mean that the processes of offering that criticism are more sophisticated, because otherwise there's no point in setting a target. So if anyone can claim, this is safety, this is why we're not doing this as well, it's not very, that's a get out of jail free card that could go all the way down the line to the people that are actually dealing with the waste. So can I just check that reflecting in your opening line, which I get why you said in a public forum, it does seem a very unsophisticated public statement to a very, very sophisticated issue, which is nuclear waste.
Oh, thank you. It's good to hear how that was heard, actually, because I was making a fairly unsophisticated point for the frontline workers, at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, about to engage in a new task, just to, as the team leaders will do, just to stop and check and say, right, is everybody comfortable with what's about to occur, and shall we proceed? And that is endemic now. It is exactly how we behave, and it's so important to continue to reinforce that, because once we lose that connection with the front line, that's where things can badly go wrong. So I was just simply making the point that we do have that attitude, that culture, particularly at Sellafield, that reinforces, every day on every task, that safety is paramount.
David, can I just to interrupt. Would you I think we heard on our visit, maybe this visit or one of the previous visits, that any members of the staff of that team can actually, if they're not happy, call a halt to that project until the issue is resolved. And that goes down to quite a junior level of staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you like to just enlarge on that?
Yes, so again, there'll be what the vernacular toolbox talks, what in America is known as, they do it on the back of a trailer if it's on a land-based site, where the team leader will just describe the activities over the next few hours, or indeed, at a more senior level over weeks and months, and then just check in, literally with everybody, personally, as in a team. If there's maybe 10 people on the shift, that typically the leader will ask each one, or just say, is anybody uncomfortable with what we're about to do? And there are examples where, and it can be really simple stuff. The way a chain is attached to a hoist, or the lighting in a particular area, or a ladder has not been secured. But that attitude, that it's the broken windows philosophy, obviously, but if that attitude prevails, I think we can all get confident that that the teams will be listened to, where safety is, as I say, paramount.
Thank you.
And to square the circle, I would hope that sophistication that you've got in the front line also extends to a sophisticated approach to those that are interrogating the targets, and possibly there was a disconnect in the sophistication that goes across those who are scrutinising and those who are actually taking out. Anyway, to my question, I want to talk about the highly active liquor, which is a new term on me from the visit. Now, within the NAO report, I'm specifically looking at paragraph 2.16, there is a part that says you really need to process quite a lot of this stuff every year before the buildings get to the end of life, the equipment gets to the end of the life, but by your own measures, you are not processing enough to finish the job by the end of life projections for the buildings and some of the equipment. So I wonder if you can give us some assurance, as a question to Euan, or how can you assure us that Sellafield will finish retrieving the waste and processing this highly active liquor before the supporting infrastructure reaches the end of its life?
Okay, so I know you just said you can't keep blaming COVID, and I won't, but COVID did have quite a big impact on our ability to vitrify. We had to stop the process for a period. We had to curtail some engineering activities. And that facility, in order to have competent operators, you need to operate it. And we had a number of operators who, at the end of COVID, decided that it was time to retire and move on. So there was quite a dip, and that's reflected in our current projection for when we're going to complete. I'm pleased to say we're pulling out of that dip now. In terms of the operators in post, I think we're about 97% of the roles all filled now. Over the last couple of years, and improving the rate that it takes to get them to scrap. Suitably qualified and experienced.
I'm going to take a break.
In terms of the actual facility itself, the end point will be when we've completed the vitrification of all the material. A couple of things on that: we're not creating any new material because we've finished reprocessing. And secondly, we've taken advantage of some evaporation capacity that we've got to reduce the volume. Since 2018, I think the heat loading in that material, which is one of the key issues, is about 37% of what it was. So we've made a really big impact since 2018. As I said, we've got the operators back. We are working through all the maintenance issues. We have a third line, so there are 3 vitrification lines. A couple of years ago, one of them was mothballed because it was felt that we could deliver the end mission with 2. We're reviewing that decision to bring that one back into operation. 2039 is the current date. That doesn't take us beyond any significant cliff edges with the facility, but I really want to try and pull that forward. So a lot of confidence in the teams and the engineering work that we're doing in there, but the proof will be in continued improvement in throughput.
And can I ask, it seems to be that you're sort of using this 2039, this is when you want to finish, this is the I think it was the tolerance level for the infrastructure. It sort of feels to me that you're using 2039 as the date that you're aiming for, and then you're working back and saying this is how much, 130 cubic metres I think it was, you have to take a year. So it feels to me that you're working towards the buildings are going to, I'm being blunt, I know I'm oversimplifying, the buildings will cease to be functional, are tolerably functionable in 2039, therefore we've got X to remove, therefore if we divide the intervening years we do that. But is COVID not shown that things can happen that massively impact on that and take you off target? So if we have another COVID level incident, whatever that may be, between now and 2039, that might put you below the tolerance. So how are you planning for that COVID level instability in the future that may happen?
I don't want you left with an impression that 2039 is some sort of cliff edge. It's our current assessment of where we want to complete before we get into a period of less reliability, not fundamental failure.
So what is I think the line in the report is strategic tolerance. I suppose to finish the answer we probably need just a better understanding of what strategic tolerance means in this instance.
So strategic tolerance is a date that we've all accepted that we're going to drive to complete by. That can change. As I say, when we do asset care, asset understanding, substantiation of the facilities, if we aren't making the progress, we will check to make sure that if we need to go beyond that date, review the strategic tolerance, agree it all the way up through the NDA and the regulator. But that is not our intent. Our intent is to try and get in front of that.
But if you've named it, it must have an importance. What I've heard is that strategic tolerance seems like an important date, but what you've sort of said is it's not really, because we can change that.
It's an important date. It's the date that we're driving for, absolutely.
So it's an arbitrary target date rather than an engineering or a structural or a nuclear safety evaluation of the infrastructure itself.
That's right. It helps us deliver our end mission of 21-25.
And again, going back to that broader issue of targets that we're saying, what is the value in setting it at all if it can change? What's the value in having a strategic tolerance date of 2039?
Because I have to motivate my staff to do their best to deliver.
Right, so motivational. It is an arbitrary target. That's how we should. I don't mean this. I don't mean this in a negative way. I just mean I'm trying to understand what is the value of it.
There's no engineering reason that you couldn't go beyond it. But in the grand scheme and the way that the portfolios all work together, that's a date that we really want to hit.
I mean, it is arbitrary, but it's well. So also say it's well judged, and a best current estimate. And we've talked earlier the importance of having some, albeit arbitrary, future view that we can work towards.
So what's my final point before I hand back to the chair on this is that when you say things like that, given your comment at the beginning about this is so dangerous and so when you set targets like that, certainly when you get it to us at this committee level, we start to put a lot of value in these things because of the way that we're evaluating the risk and the danger. So is there a sense that goes from you and all the way through the NDA, all the way up to Desnes, that understands what these terms are? Because I don't know if the committee would agree, but when we hear terms like that, we possibly react with a little more of that public approach to it. Well, that sounds pretty bad that you're not going to hit it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
could we?
Can I just come on that? Do you mind? Look, I think it's really important at Sellafield because it's such a complex site. You've got lots of different arrangements and infrastructure. Understanding the strategic case about why particular things need to be completed by particular dates in relation to how they connect to other things on the site is really important. Euan and the team, I think, though, are having to make have to make assessments based on their views about the condition of the current infrastructure. Some of those views they'll be able to extend things beyond their current assessments. In other cases, those assessments won't prove to be right. So they're having to make those sorts of assessments on an ongoing basis, and they use those, amongst other things, to set some of those deadlines to try to complete tasks by. In the case of the waste vitrification, I'd say, yes, the numbers in those particular years were below where was needed to be to hit that target, that end goal of 2039. On the other hand, without wanting to put too much focus on a single year, when you look at how the rates are improved in 23-24, I think it shows what the system is capable of, and the fact that it ought to be able to scale up and be done more quickly in future. So that, for me, is the reason to be more confident about the prospects for reaching that 2039 deadline.
I agree with that. I would like to say I don't think the targets are arbitrary, actually, just for the record. I think they are carefully balanced set of assumptions that are made along the lines that Clive has just set out in a set of circumstances that are hugely uncertain because of the challenges of all the things we've discussed. So I don't think they are arbitrary. I think they are the best judgments of... it goes right down from the front line of the expertise. Euan is talking about the guys on the front line and the women on the front line, through David and up to government and the regulators about setting what is a realistic set of ambitious but achievable targets. And I think it goes back to your point right from the start, which is being really clear about the assumptions that are made to assume those targets, but they're not arbitrary, just for the record. Very important to say.
I hear your optimism about the validity of targets, but Clive, I do want to quote to you a paragraph in the middle of page 39, which deeply worried me when I read it, and I'm going to read it out because I would like to get everybody's reaction to it. Around 18% of critical assets were recorded as being unknown condition in March 24. Sellafield told us this was largely down to resourcing challenges in its central team, which meant that it had not entered all the relevant information into its centred database, and that only 9% of critical assets are currently unknown condition. If the assets are in an unknown condition, how can you possibly set a target for that particular aspect? And it does mention resources from the central team. So again, I mean, we will come on to staff in a little while, no doubt. But if Sellafield, if David Peattie's team are not being given the resources to deal with these matters, surely we should be, as the public, deeply worried about that.
So I'd read that as saying that 9% were in an unknown condition, as the others hadn't been on the data set that the NAO had access to at a particular point in time, but I'll let you and others correct me if I'm wrong about that. I think you're dealing with assets that are old, and again, you can sort of fill and explain to us why it is difficult sometimes to know what the state of those assets are. They may be hidden from view, for example. You may not have the monitoring equipment in place that you would for newly built assets, and things like that, so we can hear more from Euan. As to the financials, the resourcing available, ministers set the budgets for the NDA. The NDA's board then decides how best to allocate that across the different operating companies, and it's for those operating companies to make sure that they're targeting those resources and where the areas of greatest risk are. Clearly, understanding of the asset condition is really important for that to do that effectively.
But to have real confidence at 2039 figure, you have to know what the conditions of the building are. And I was looking for it, I haven't yet found it. There's another paragraph in the report somewhere that says there is a danger that if you don't really get a grip on the condition of these buildings, they will run out of usefulness before you've completed the task, leading to a position where you've got to build very expensive buildings costing billions for a relatively small amount of material to be reprocessed.
I mean, a lot of the work at Sellafield is that sort of race against time. It's about taking action and sorting things out within the lifespans of the existing assets, and that's one of the things that I'm sure guides the Sellafield board and the NDA board when they choose where to deploy those resources.
So, having told us that, given that it is this race against time, haven't we got to be very careful about the resources that we give to Sellafield to make sure that it isn't the resource that's the limiting factor?
The government is responsible for setting the overall resources. Ministers decide on the level of resourcing for the NDA as a whole. They need to they need to take into account a whole range of factors when they do that. Any government at any point in time needs to do that.
And safety and security of the site is always front and centre of any decisions about resourcing. And that is what drives the decision-making that David and Euan take forward in terms of how to prioritise a complex set of changes. And I was on site recently as well, talking to some of the team just about how do you manage, and you may want to say more about this, decisions about where to leave a building because you have to focus on another building that is in a more difficult condition and needs to be prioritised. It sounds to me like from my experience on site, you're doing that on a live basis, Euan, because it's necessary to do so.
This is a critical issue that needs very careful consideration. Luke Charteris.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Peattie, you described the MSSS as, if I'm right, Britain's most hazardous building. And when we visited, we heard about the ongoing leaks from that site. Mr. Hutton, could you just update the committee on the rate of leaks from MSSS?
Yeah, so the rate of the leak from MSSS is 2.1 metres cubed a day. It has been steady at that level now for I'm going to say a good couple of years. When it first manifested itself in the autumn of 2018, it was slightly higher than that, but it has reduced down to that volume. Can I just describe the leak for people who might not
just very briefly
have a picture?
Please.
Yeah, very quickly. So the silo that we're referring to is a set of concrete boxes where a third of the silo is underground and 2/3 above the ground. We believe that the route that the cover water is taking is probably through failures on construction joints that are below the ground. So I don't want you to picture an above ground leak or a weeping crack. It's below ground, and that makes it quite difficult to identify exactly where it is. We know which part of the building it's coming from, and therefore to be able to do much rectification to it. However,
well, if I may continue, I mean, by my maths as to the rate of leakage, around every 3 years you've seen an Olympic-sized swimming pool in terms of cubic metre of water volume leaking into the environment every 3 years, which is a considerable amount. And therefore, I'd really like to push you on the overall delays to the project, because if you turn to the report, and it's all set out in figure 5, but I'm sure you're familiar with the slippage, that as the slippage goes on, you know, for another 3 years of slippage, you've got another Olympic-sized swimming pool amount of radioactive waste entering the environment. How much slippage are you content with? Because it equates to waste entering our environment.
So if you also look at the table, you'll see that in terms of the range, we're still within the range to finish. 2059, I think, is the date. The liquor that's leaking into the environment, the activity that we are concerned about is actually retained pretty much in the soil beneath the facility.
Did you say pretty confident?
Sorry, no, I said pretty much.
Pretty much?
Yeah, so the cesium is contained in almost its totality. Strontium slightly more mobile. We've got excellent ground modelling and monitoring, which shows that that's where the activity is staying. So it stays underneath. It doesn't pose a detriment to the public where it is.
And if I may add, the Environment Agency, who obviously oversees this very closely with us, with the regulator, we all agree that the best solution to this is to empty the silo as efficiently and quickly as we can. The other remediation steps would be extremely complex, extremely costly, and actually put people in harm's way to try and fix it by some any other means. So look, it's a real issue. Obviously, it's the single biggest environmental issue.
Would you mind accounting for the reasons of the timing slippage with the MSSS programme?
Currently, we have one machine. The challenges that we've had this year is actually the interface between the new equipment we've installed and the old equipment that was already there. So the availability of the cranes and its connection to how those cranes are powered in the building have caused us a problem in the summer. As I did say earlier on, we are at the very early stages. We've got one machine, we've proved it's working. The second machine is built. I believe you saw the second machine. We're commissioning that at the moment. And with those two machines in operation, that will start to significantly reduce the waste in that old part of the building. I have to make decisions. I have to make judgment balances. The Environment Agency were working closely on the leak, and the ONR on the total material in the facility. I have to work out whether it's right to focus on the original building to minimise the leak, which would have a negative impact on the end point for the whole building, or do I progress to get to the end point on the whole building? These are all decisions, as Lee was saying, that we take in conjunction with the regulator, with the department, with the ND around what the correct order of work is to deliver the risk reduction, be that in the leak or in the total, as early as we can.
Just to add, I mean, I cannot tell you the sort of close working with the Environment Agency and the ONR on this. They're on site all the time, and I wouldn't want anyone in this room to think that this is not a completely overseen and managed process because of the significance of the issue. And as Euan said, there is a huge knowledge base of understanding of what's actually happening to the radiation. So the cesium and the strontium, which are coming through, are contained by and large. And so although there is a volume of water coming out, as you said, it's not carrying that radiation in the same way, because it gets immobilised, because it's trapped through. I'm not a chemist, but it gets trapped. And the thing, I was on sites recently, and I met, I've forgotten his second name, Phil.
Reeve.
Phil Reeve, who is the manager that runs that unit. He is a contaminated land expert, and he came from, his previous role was in clearing up old mining coal mines. And I was very, very impressed by his knowledge and his thinking about how to deal with these challenges, and alongside him was the Environment Agency team. So I think it's really important to just say in this room, nobody underestimates the challenge here, and the decisions that are made in terms of the actions are carefully balanced with the regulator on a daily basis.
And sorry, just to build on that, can I?
Well, if I may, I think it's important to be transparent with the public that not only are you doing that close working to minimise the risk, but just to specify in clear terms to the public what the level of leak is. And over a decade, that could be 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of waste. But your view is, and you can put this on the record today, that you're managing those 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of waste in a safe manner.
We are, and it's not just our opinion. We've sought, with support from the Environmental Agency, a broad church of independent and international experts who are challenging what we're doing to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can.
May I now turn to security?
I mean, given we've already discussed, the risk against time on this, and you're not going to close this facility completely until 2060, is there a danger that this, as it was described to us in the visit, this clay subbase, which is very good at removing these dangerous radiological elements, is like a sponge? It will take so much and then it will suddenly break down, and then we are into a really difficult situation.
We don't believe so, and the reason I can say that is that we've got models backed up with data. So the models make predictions, and the data we've got proves those predictions. So we don't believe there's a point at which, if you like, it'll give up and release it.
Thank you. Yes, Chris.
I think it's just worth
just
being clear, as Euan can confirm this, that nobody's suggesting there's an alternative strategy rather than emptying the silos as quickly as possible. Yeah. And we then need to focus about how you do that as quickly as possible, which the question's been focused on. But in terms of there being an alternative strategy to mitigate this problem and deal with it, there isn't one at the moment. That's the plan.
Yeah. Luke.
Thank you. It was really regrettable, of course, wasn't it, to see the guilty plea to the charges brought by the ONR around cyber resilience and testing. Would you apologise for that failure?
Yeah, as an organisation, we let ourselves down. We wrote a nuclear site security plan that was very clear on how we said we would do things, and we didn't do things exactly the same way that we wrote them in that report. I would also say that counter to some of the press at the time, the ONR would support this. We have no evidence, and we haven't had a successful cyber attack that was described, as I say, in the press. So regrettable, and something that we are doing a number of things to make sure it doesn't happen again.
How can you assure us that such a prosecution would not be brought again, and that you're putting in new mitigations and investments?
We've got a 7-point agreement, a 7-point plan with the regulator. We're working through it at the moment. We've made really good progress on that. We got a letter the other day from the regulator about progress made, and we anticipate that by the autumn, you haven't touched on it, but the regulator has 3 levels of regulation: routine, enhanced and significantly enhanced. Cyber is currently in significantly enhanced, the top level of regulation. We anticipate in the autumn, the work that we've done, the indication that we've got talking to the regulator is that in the autumn we'll be moving from significantly enhanced to enhanced. The reason I've got some confidence in that is because recently our physical security, which you saw some of when you came on the visit, moved from enhanced to routine just before Christmas. So I've got confidence that we've got a route to get to where we want to get to.
And finally, just on physical security, because the British public will want to know that Sellafield is secure in the physical realm too.
Yeah.
You'll have seen that there have been incidents with drones affecting airports, prisons and many other public buildings. What steps are you taking to further upgrade and protect Sellafield from physical threats such as drones?
Can I just issue a warning here? Please don't tell us anything that shouldn't be in the public domain. I'm sure you won't.
Shan't.
No.
All I would say is that across the NDA, so this is a great example of NDA working together. We're doing some work on autonomous systems that we're trialling elsewhere that will provide threat detection response at a reduced cost. We're doing that through this year, and we would hope to be in a position to be able to deploy that at Sellafield when it's proven elsewhere. I don't want to say where it is or what it is, but we're working together on that.
You want to do your supplementary, Luke?
That was predominantly.
Right. Okay, if you're satisfied for the time being, we are now going to take, as is customary now in this committee, a short break. If we could be back here by past, remembering please that there will be microphones and one thing and another around the room, so just be careful who says what. So, order. There's One where the other?
Check.
We're okay.
We started, sorry, press the button now.
We started broadcasting?
Yes.
Right, okay. Order. We will now resume the session. Thank you all very much indeed. And we now come, please, to Anna, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I get into my area of questioning, I just wanted to pick up the last point that Luke raised about cyber security. And just to clarify, were you saying that were or had not been successful attacks?
Had not been successful attacks.
You're saying there had not been successful attacks. So on no occasion were any of these cyber security threats successful in actually accessing into your safety critical systems?
And we've had a number of interventions where we've proved actually, even though we were prosecuted by the regulator congratulated us on the quality of the challenge we put into our operational technology. So you just said in our safety critical systems, the systems that actually can operate the facilities, and that project determined that it was impossible to create a thing called an unacceptable radiological release from that method. So we have never had one. And the attacks, if you like, we do on ourselves have determined that we have an incredibly robust system.
Okay. So I just briefly want to come, when we visited, we heard about something called the Programme and Project Partners approach. And it seemed that this longer-term collaboration between different suppliers was creating some more positive way of working than perhaps is reflected within the main operating and certainly the historic way of operating at Sellafield. Would you like to say a little more about, I don't know whether it's Mr. Peattie or Mr. Hutton, about this approach and why and how the internal culture of that particular programme seems to be better than the internal culture of wider Sellafield?
Okay, so I'll briefly describe the programme project partnership. So this is a 20-year procurement whereby we work very closely with four large suppliers to essentially be available to us to deliver all of the major new capability that we need. It's a long-term relationship which removes the need to compete every new build that we would like, so a new store or whatever else. As I say, it's 20 years. The sorts of benefits that we get are across a whole range of topics. From, for example, investment in graduates and apprentices by those particular suppliers. That part of it has brought on sort of 53 extra apprentices and about 54 extra graduates. That's great because you've got that commitment to the local community. Just on that, the workforce which is then delivering for us is predominantly based in Cumbria and Warrington. The lights just came on. Do you need another answer, or is that... No.
You mentioned Cumbria and the lights.
There we are.
Cumbria's back in business.
Yeah.
The sorts of savings that we've seen from that are, for example, about 80 million just in procurement costs, so not having to re-procure for new things. Something as simple as coordinating transport for workers to the site across all the programmes has a significant benefit over the lifetime. But also the use of key delivery partners. So you've got the PPP, they use X company for scaffolding or pool and pipe or whatever. What we have at the moment in our pipeline, our portfolio of projects, are projects which are in a design stage or a construction stage moving into mechanical and electrical instrumentational fit out, that you can retain those, just as long as they're delivering, those partners to move from one to t'other. It gives us a really, currently it's delivering some really good output. So two of the plants that we're currently building have had IPA green reviews, and I think that's reflected in the report. and we have the next 3 facilities are now at the next stage. Now we're hoping to get so much more out of those, because those will be purely delivered by this construct. The ones that are in delivery at the moment were actually started just before, so there was a transition to these, but we're seeing the benefit from all of that. The end of your question around, so how do we make sure that we learn from that and we spread it across? So we do still have some other projects that are being delivered in the old model, because we have the same management structure above that and the utilisation of things called senior responsible owners. We can take the learning, even though it's not part of Programme Project Partnership, I do apologise, and share that into the other projects which aren't being delivered. To the point actually where my projects director, who's principally focused on those mega projects, if you like, is forming that view all the way over to projects over £20 million. So we're trying to cascade that out across the piece. Some of the real innovations I've seen there, especially around things like, and I think you saw this, the imaginatively called 4D BIM cave, which is essentially you take the digital version that you created for the design of the plant and you make it work every single day for you. It is really, really driving benefits to delivering to cost and schedule, hence the current IPA reviews.
Yeah, so thank you. I obviously did accompany colleagues on that visit to Sellafield, and we did indeed see the very innovative use of that modelling and its use to ensure that things were going to get delivered on time and cost effectively. And it just seemed to me that there was a greater level of focus on project planning, delivery, efficiency, innovation within that so-called PPP group that we didn't see on your other projects, and is showing up in what my colleagues have been looking at in terms of the them being over schedule and off track. So I'm sort of pleased to hear you say that you are going to take that learning, and hopefully we'll see some of the benefits of that feeding through in future years. I mean, perhaps you, Mr. Peattie, would like to say how you're taking that approach across the NDA.
Yeah, well, we do have a community of project leaders now, which, again, under one NDA, meet regularly under the leadership of the Central Projects team. And that's a really important forum for sharing across the group, whether it's for Dounreay in Scotland or the former Magnox sites. So
we'll be adopting some of this excellence in project and programme management, like was it 4D?
Where relevant, particularly on big new build, is where it really pays off. And having people transfer around the group is also a really beneficial way of handling it.
Thank you, Anna. Sarah Paul, please.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. I'd like to turn to the replacement analytical project. So, as is noted in the NAO's report, Sellafield's biggest single risk to its current and future operations is that its analytical services function will fail, disrupting other site operations, and that this is both very likely to happen and could have a very high impact on its activities if it does. The replacement analytical project outline business case was approved in 2019. By 2021, the programme was in serious difficulty and likely to cost more and take longer than the worst case estimates in the outline business case. In late 2023, Sellafield determined that it did not have a coherent plan to deliver analytical services, and then in early 2024, Sellafield paused the programme and started developing a new strategy for analytical services. So my question is to Mr. Hutton. As it was clear years ago that the replacement analytical project was not going to meet your requirements quickly enough, why did you not take decisive action much sooner?
Whenever you're delivering a project of this sort of like length and complexity, inevitably you want to get started, and that's what we did in this case. The options that have become available to us since we started weren't available at the beginning. So that's a crucial factor. And we've created that alternative by delivering another programme of work, which we call post-operational clean-out. We continue to drive on a kind of broad front, and that's given us a different option. fundamentally, around December 23, there was an incoherence that came out between the availability of the analytical services and when I needed to have that available for the special nuclear, the plutonium repack plant. And there was a gap of about sort of 4.5 years was appearing between the two. So I instigated I call it an inter-programme review to see if we could make sure we pulled it all together to give us a plan that would deliver. About 6 weeks after we started that, we worked through and decided to pause the RAP project, which is a specific part of that programme, because I didn't want to spend much more on that as the alternative was becoming more we had more confidence in the alternative. Why did it take so long? Because we were doing other work. So we had to do this work around the potential alternative, which proved successful. It gave us a different option than we had before, and I believe that option gives me the capability at least 4 years earlier, not quite close the gap. I'm not going to pretend we've closed the gap, but it's much, much closer. And the alternative against the requirements that we have extending out will probably be delivered for between 500 and £1 billion less than the project that I have paused. Now, that is still in pause. We're working through with the department a decision on whether or not we cancel it altogether. It gets slightly more complex because what we want to do at Sellafield is make sure that we support the UK's needs for future radioelectrical analysis. Our needs will be catered for very clearly by our alternative. The future UK needs is something equally important to us all, and we're working closely with the department on what that might look like. So we're in that process at the moment. The last little bit I just wanted to touch on, and sorry if I'm now droning on, is actually the original facility which we were worried about. This sounds counterintuitive, but we've had to invest a lot in asset care in the old facility, which actually makes it available to us for longer. So we have recently replaced all the electrical distribution boards. We're working through the ventilation. We have removed some acute risks. I can't remember if some of you were in that facility, certainly some of my departmental colleagues, in terms of some old labs we've decommissioned. And we're doing work to replace the roof. And what that gives me is the current facility, even though it was one of the one of the original buildings on the site, it actually gives me that capability for a lot longer. As I say, we hadn't had that, so we didn't want to stop. It's one of these things. You don't want to stop what you're doing until you're pretty confident that you've got an alternative. I think that was about 6 weeks before we decided to do the programme review and we instigated the pause to stop spending money on it.
Thank you for that. So in terms of delivering the analytical services and providing the capabilities for the site, and in terms of fully addressing the risks at the current site,
yep.
You're confident that there's an alternative
Yes.
How so? Obviously you said that we've paused at the moment. How far along in that process are we in terms of the alternative?
So the alternative, we would still stay in the pretty detailed study phase. We've done a lot of site investigation. We're confident that the alternative for the plutonium analysis is a viable alternative. Everything will fit. It's in a building that's well looked after. It's got proper ventilation, etc. We have spent, you're probably going to ask this, we have spent money on the original one. We believe that we can reuse about 52%. It's about 147 million of the money we invested in the original. In the future, that includes things like analytical equipment, glove boxes, which are the containment structures that go around the analytical equipment, in that new option. So I'm pretty confident, and the teams. And I'd love you all to come and spend some time with the teams in analytical services. They're just fantastic. The things that they're achieving in there, I didn't think we could do 2 years ago, and they're knocking it out of the park, to use a colloquialism.
Euan, well, you've given us quite a lot of information, but I'm not sure we've got to the bottom of this problem. Given the criticality of these analytical services that analyse highly active and medium active material, you've spent 250 odd million. You reckon that 127 million, I think you said, that will be able to be reused. But I'm not quite sure where we are at the moment. Given in your letter that we've just received, you say rather than installing the new SNM analytical capacity in the CL facility, Sellafield's preferred way forward is to repurpose the existing Sellafield mixed oxide fuel plant SMP lab to provide SNM analysis capability and to continue provision of MA and HA analysis capability through the existing analytical service facilities. Work has been undertaken to ascertain the asset condition of both facilities, which will support such a decision. So I'm not quite sure what the way forward is now, when it's likely to be delivered, what the cost is going to be, and whether it will give you a gap in analytical capability, which seems to be highly dangerous in the processing of all that.
Okay. So the what is, and you touched on the two, so there's two types of analysis: plutonium analysis and medium active, highly active analysis. Plutonium analysis, we're very confident that we can refit a lab in the Sellafield MOX plant, so that's where that's going to go. Very confident with that. We're working through a direct comparison at the moment to make sure that we aren't that we're in the right place in terms of the CL is the central lab at the top end of the site. So we're doing that, but we're quite confident, and we've had this all independently assured to make sure that we're not believing our own rhetoric, as it were. So that's the plutonium part of it. The MA, medium active, highly active, that supports predominantly the vitrification that we were talking about earlier on. We would have had to utilise the current facility to at least 2035 whilst waiting for the RAP project. With the work that we're doing in the current facility, we can extend the life well beyond that out to the 2039-40 that we need it. At that point, so this is where the question about, so what does the future look like? We are very confident that we'll be able to put in the capability to deal with what we need at least, and there's a little bit of a thing we just need to make sure we're clear on, at least until 2040. But that doesn't mean to say in 2040 all that stops. We will have the capability in SMP to deliver on the plutonium analysis. We might even be able to use that to support plutonium disposition. We talked about that earlier. I can't say we can or we can't, but we'll have a new facility that might be able to do that. And in 2040, our need for the MAHA really reduces as we complete the vitrification mission. I'm quite confident the current facility, as I say, with the work that we've done over the last 2 years to improve it, and all the things I just covered, electrical, ventilation, etc., will give me that capability. I will get SNM probably 4 years quicker. Plutonium. I keep saying special nuclear material. I'll get the plutonium capability at least 4 years quicker than I would with RAP. Still a gap to when I might need it, and we're working on trying to close that gap. And we anticipate somewhere between 500 and $1 billion less than the total cost of the RAP project. Now, I'm not going to pretend or describe that as a saving, but it's a cost avoidance that allows the department to make other decisions and invest that in what the UK needs for its future needs.
Still a whole lot of questions.
Sorry.
You're confident you're going to get this at a lesser price. The original proposal was going to cost 1,400 million to 1,800 million. So what's the new proposal going to cost?
As I say, it's somewhere between 500 million and $1 billion less than that.
Less than what?
Less than, and that's why there's a range, less than that total up to the 1.8. That could cost up to the 1.8. So that's why I've said a range, somewhere between 500 and $1 billion, depending on how much RAP was actually going to outturn that. Right. Bearing in mind we were still in the outline business case phase.
I think I've got that. And how critical is this gap that you can't yet tell us really what it's going to be is?
The 6 months or so. Sorry, so there's about a 6 month gap now between the alternative and when I would actually need it. So we'll be able to put contingency, either utilising our colleagues at UKNNL to be able to provide that, or some work we can do in our current facility. So I'm not too concerned about that.
The key thing
that's the National Nuclear Lab, which also sits on the Sellafield site, which you will have driven past.
I think the key thing is that gap is an awful lot smaller than the gap you were facing under RAP.
Yes.
So although you've brought that right down, Euan, in your current proposals, there is still a small gap. It's a lot smaller than the gap you were dealing with previously.
It was 4.5 years before. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris Kane, please.
Thank you. Very interesting listening to that. I've got a question for David. And David, I'm going to quote you from the PAC report from October 2018. And it said in paragraph 3 of that report, the NDA has not identified the lessons from project cancellations and past mistakes. The NDA has cancelled 3 projects since 2012 after spending £586 million of taxpayers' money on them. It goes on, but in effect what we're hearing now, and it sounds, I can't fault the logic for what Euan's saying, but it sounds like we've been here before. So I'd like to know what are you doing to identify the lessons from when this has happened in the past, and what are you doing to ensure that these lessons have been applied to the current situation? Because what I think the committee would be worried about is, given the way this works, that over the next 30 years, subsequent committees are going to hear pretty compelling arguments from David and David's successors, but at the sting in the tail at every point is there was £250 million spent on the project before it was paused and moved on. So there has to be lessons learned and an evolution of that approach to minimise the initial spend that then is paused. So it's a question generally about lessons learned, because we have been here before, and it sounds like we will be here again because of the movement and the evolution of technology and approaches.
I think it is possible we could be here again in the future. However, we do learn from history, and thankfully this does not happen very often. Thankfully, there are one or two experiences of this over the last decade or so, and each one does seem to have its own particular circumstances, particularly RAP. And the decision is not taken lightly to suspend these projects. But stepping back and thinking about the taxpayer value as a whole, we think this was the right approach. And then we learn again, because the SROs, senior responsible owners for these projects, do meet regularly. We have introduced something called reference class forecasting, which uses ranges as we think about projections for projects, and more frequent check-in points in the early years of developing the projects. We found help as well, rather than just leaving the project team to crack on for months or even quarters without any sense check. Use of red teams, so independent views brought in. The IPA helps us from time to time as well when they look at the major projects approach. So there's a whole raft of checks which we do apply, and we learn internally across the group as well. And yet, looking forward, and the improvements in technology could well lead to us needing to reflect and look again at a particular capital project. And while I've got the floor, Mr. Kane, could I just correct something for the record that was noted earlier about targets? I want to emphasise our targets are finally judged, they're thought through carefully, and we don't regard them as arbitrary. I just wanted to correct something I said earlier on that.
Can I just add a little bit to that? My voice was...
I think, to be fair, Clive wanted to come in.
Oh, sorry.
It was actually just to say, I think there is evidence actually in this NAO report about some of the lessons being learned about more effective project delivery going on at Sellafield. I think the fact that you can, in many cases, draw a line between those projects that were started pre-2018 and those that were started post-2018, and the fact we're getting some really positive reviews from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority is a positive. RAP stands out on that list, let's be honest. So it's not been in a good place. But I think when you look at the project profile and portfolio overall, we have seen some of those improvements coming through. The other thing I'd say is actually calling out and deciding to stop a project which is mid-flow when you know that it's absolutely essential for your overall endeavour is a tough call to make. And I think making sure that colleagues in Sellafield have got the ability to do that is another part of the equation here, and being able to make those decisions.
I would agree with that, but for the lessons learned point of view, it's absolutely right to say that if you pause at this point, you can say that's the right decision. But the lesson learned would be then looking back at the beginning decision to see what was or was not right then. So it's not about criticising the current decision, it's about asking, are you curiously looking back throughout the process, right back to the beginning, to work out what you might do differently at the start of the next one.
I think David referred, if I may, to some of the examples of better practice that are being used now that ought to reduce the likelihood of those things happening again, about getting better external assurance, about using things like reference class forecasting much more actively around the way that the baselines for these projects are set.
I think some of the tangible evidence on improvement, which I think we should acknowledge. I think it's 3 out of your 4, or maybe it's 4 projects are now green rated by the IPA. This is like pretty impressive stuff. I know from my own experience on major projects. So this is like the sort of journey from the pre-2018 under the new PPP arrangements and the learning that is going through the processes. And I think that is a pretty impressive performance on those projects. So although, as Clive said, RAP stands out, I think the overall direction of travel on project delivery is actually improving at the site.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
You done? All right. Sarah Olney, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report that the Public Accounts Committee did in 2018 highlighted that there's lots of different layers of decision making, and that really inhibits the ability to kind of respond rapidly. And in the NAO's new report, we're finding it's actually taking slightly longer to make decisions on some of your biggest projects than it did in 2018. So it doesn't feel as if much progress has been made on that. So, Mr. Maxwell, can you say why has more not been done to streamline decision making?
Yeah. Can I just start by saying a few words about the different types of decisions we're talking about here? I think when I look at those different decision-making frameworks, we start off, we've got decisions about big investment decisions, in particular about some of the big new projects that are taking place. If I look at the work of the NDA benefits from a higher threshold for taking those decisions. So the NDA and its partner, its operating companies, of £100 million. So it's got delegated approvals to take decisions up to £100 million, which is twice the level I've got across the rest of the department's activity. When I look at the way the department engages in verifying and taking the decisions about those that fall above that threshold, we go out of our way to make sure that's done in as simple a way as possible. We don't, for example, require additional types of assurance. We use the NDA and Sellafield's own assurance procedures to give us advice and information. So I think we're doing as much as we can around some of those activities. The second category is around commercial approvals. Most of the big commercial decisions in government procurements and the like also require sign-offs of different levels. I point out the fact that the NDA benefits from not going through the department's standardised commercial approvals process. We have a very close working relationship between our commercial teams to make sure they're much more joined up and therefore don't need to take those commercial decisions through the department's own commercial approvals board. It does still need, in many cases, to go through the Cabinet Office as a standalone process. And the third thing are the budgetary controls that we have that are usually in year around where money is spent. As I've said earlier in this discussion, one of the characteristics of the funding arrangements for the NDA is that the NDA is essentially provided a budget for a year, and with very, very few exceptions, it's up to the NDA board and then subsequently the boards of its operating companies to decide how that money is spent. That is quite a different level and type of financial control to what we have within the department and across our normal projects, where we, for example, have ring-fenced budgets that can only be spent in year on particular activities. So I think in many of those ways we've moved quite a long way, or we have a situation which is quite different and gives the sorts of flexibilities the NDA and Sellafield need. Come back to the question as to what have you done to improve? What have you done to improve matters? Because that data suggests that if anything, things have got slightly worse rather than better. Look, I suppose what I'm not going to do is say that we're going to stop having robust controls and challenge. I'm afraid I think you'd have to dig into the individual projects and investment decisions that were looked at. My guess is that some of them were ones where actually the department said no the first time round, or the Treasury said no, and some further work was needed.
Can I come back to you on the point about the Treasury and their role? In the report, it highlights that the Treasury feel that because their formal involvement doesn't come until towards the end of the approval process, and that sometimes it's not always clear to them what steps have been taken further up the chain. Is there not a value in involving the Treasury sooner?
Look, I think we endeavour to do that as much as possible where it makes sense to do that. So, yes, we do want the Treasury to be involved early. And again, if I look across the department's work in general, we know that bringing the department in early before you get to formal decision-making stages is much the best way of doing that. I know the Treasury also have regular meetings with our sponsor team, it's in Lee's part of the department, to make sure they're up to speed on the whole range of activities that the NDA and its operating companies are doing, not just the investment decisions, so they can understand the broader context that we're operating in here.
Why has the Treasury not yet been involved in your analytical services strategy?
Well, that was at the point that report was written.
Okay.
My guess is they probably are because it's coming. I know it's slated to come through our decision-making process actually in the next few weeks. Sure. I think I've had the draft papers for it, so I'm imagining the Treasury are involved at the moment.
Okay, you're imagining.
I will double check for you, but I would certainly expect so because we normally involve the Treasury in those sorts of big decisions well before they come to the department's investment committee, so that we know that the sorts of questions they're going to ask in advance, we can make sure we're covering them off as much as possible in the department's own processes.
I can confirm that the Treasury have been involved in the discussion ahead of the decision, which has not yet been made.
Thank you, Chair.
Sarah Olney's questions has spurned a question in my mind which doesn't enter anywhere in the report, but nevertheless I'd like to know what is UKGI's role in all of this?
UKGI provide the shareholder non-exec director who sits on the board of the NDA. The department receives sort of corporate type advice from UKGI in how it exercises that function. And it also helps the department in holding the NDA to account and supporting the NDA in doing its role. So the UKGI carries out that function on a number of big arm's length bodies, partner organisations across government. And it means that it has teams who have got particular skills around some of those corporate governance type roles.
Well, the advantage of having been on this committee for a long time, David Peattie, is that I have corporate memory of UKGI and the problems that you all got into with the Magnox contracts. I am still not getting the impression that UKGI actually... Does it actually add anything, David Peattie, to your deliberations and proposals?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, in a specific area, they lead and support in the appointment of non-executive directors, particularly to the NDA board, and that's a unique skill that UKGI bring around governance that is helpful for the process to take some of the load off our chair and our senior independent director. And then, as Clive says, there is a nominated director on the board of the NDA, one of the directors from UKGI. And they bring into the board meeting and subsequently in separate meetings advice, challenge and support on matters not just around governance but on commercial matters, on funding. So yes, we do find them a helpful adjunct to how we operate.
Okay. Euan, I've been reflecting on your answers, and I'm going to push you again on this replacement analytical facility, the new proposals you've got. Can you be very clear what you think, what your estimates of cost of that are? I don't want less than whatever, I just want what it is actually going to cost.
We will provide that in writing. I haven't got those numbers to hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anna Dixon, please.
Yes, back to me. Thank you very much, Chair. In 2019, obviously Sellafield went under the direct control of the NDA, the sort of creation of what you called the one NDA. Yeah. It seems that sort of despite that, I have to say, looking at figure 2 and just hearing that last sort of interaction about the governance structure with the UKGI and what you were saying, I think earlier about the so-called sort of G6 that, you know, you've got ONR, EA, NDA, Sellafield, UKGI. I lost count of who was in the room, but I have to say it doesn't seem to have done much to streamline or the sort of number of layers within this. So on figure 3, it sets out what the expected benefits were of the one NDA, of this idea of bringing Sellafield as a wholly owned subsidiary under the NDA. One of those overarching benefits was improved culture for our people based on values such as respect, inclusion, openness and transparency. So I wondered, Mr. Peattie, how you thought you're getting on with delivering the benefits of one NDA.
So as the report, thank you for the question, as the report recognises, the creation of one NDA has delivered at least £170 million a year of specific savings to the taxpayer through saving a fee to the private sector companies that previously ran the sites, group-wide buying of contracts rather than buying things 4 or 5 times, just buying them once, whether this, as a simple example, with Microsoft licenses or with printing, and there's a lot more to go. We're only really in the first few years of what has been a major transformation of how we're organised. It's a much simpler organisation than it was when I took over. It may still occur, it's very complex, but it is a complex business, and the 4 pillars that we now have, which are Sellafield, nuclear restoration services, nuclear waste services and the transport division, are each quite unique, and they do different things. So they each have a board of directors. We have all of those directors meet regularly now, which again would never have happened just a few years ago. We've put in place something called the Leadership Academy. Now over 100 people have been on that, where we set out the cultural norms, the behaviours we expect of our leaders going forward. So these cultural aspects, they're really important to me personally as we lead the organisation through these next few years. So more to go, obviously, but the early signs are good. We certainly saved for the taxpayer in creation, in real bottom line pounds savings. You know, if you add it up over a few years, you can quickly get to £1 billion. I would further add the AGRs coming over to us, decision supported by us, made by the department a couple of years ago, would have been very, very difficult under the old construct. It would have cost the taxpayer a significant amount of extra fee. And it's now involves all parts of the NDA group, and our relationships with EDF are very strong, and I think that's another positive about how one NDA is working. There's lots more, technology transfer, moving people around.
Yeah, you say you're in the early stages. Obviously, we're now some 5 years in since you took over Sellafield, and yet in June 2023, this is in paragraph 1.9 of the NAO report, it says the ONR wrote to the NDA emphasising that it believed the NDA should play a greater role in offering support and holding Sellafield to account for delivery, safety and security. So, you know, I would just sort of urge again to say, and perhaps you could write in more detail sort of to the committee, whether really you're paying close enough attention to the improvements needed in the corporate culture within the subsidiary, in this case, Sellafield.
Well, again, I think we are, but let me emphasise as well, there's more work to do across the group. As I said earlier, I've put in place some big new changes around culture. We have group-wide survey now that we didn't have a couple of years ago. We have dedicated people in the area of ethics and compliance. We have a single approach to speak up. We encourage, the tone from the top is important. I speak regularly at internal conferences, and I always talk about the importance of transparency and the ability of people to speak the truth. Yeah, and with an organisation as big as it is, 19,000 people, 17 sites around the UK with industrial history we have, you know, there are going to be issues, but we're going to continue to work them through and investigate where appropriate.
Yes, well, I'm glad to see that.
Sorry, Lee McDonough, I think.
Well, okay.
Yes.
It's fine if you.
I just wanted to pursue a line of questioning with Mr. Peattie, if that's all right,
yes.
Chair, and then I'll come to the other panel members. So as we talked at the head of the session, and as you've repeated, obviously workforce culture directly impacts safety reporting. So back in 2018, I understand one of your employee surveys found that only 11% strongly agreed that they could speak without fear of reprisal. That's just 11%. Given that Sellafield is a nuclear site where safety should be paramount, why did, I guess, you know, Sellafield, NDA and ONR, and I mean, and perhaps you, as the department, want to address this. Why did they not act on these findings with greater urgency? Many of the things that you've said to me, Mr. Peattie, are actions that seem to have been taken sort of in the last 2 years, and yet the problems were really known since 2017-2018. And indeed, the survey data that you shared with me just yesterday, which I'd like to quote from, it suggests that you've decided the need to add a category of retaliation to your most recent survey, and saying you believe that the steps that have taken since the survey was rolled out in 2024 will support improvements, particularly around confidence in non-retaliation, which has been specifically addressed in our training packages and supporting material.
Should we just leave it there?
Yeah,
because otherwise poor Mr. Peattie is going to not be able to actually remember it all.
Well, so
still a problem. My point.
Well, 2018, the journey certainly began to, as part of one NDA, to also see cultural improvement across the group. So it did start much sooner than 2 or 3 years ago, but we've just doubled down on the steps that we've taken as we work through this. The survey now, it's my understanding it's absolutely best practice now to ask the specific question about people's confidence in not being feeling retaliatory action. And the survey, just literally in the last few weeks across the whole group, should give us all confidence that it's in a much better place than it was in 2018. And of course, we're not going to rest until it's even better going through it. And we continue every year to do this survey. And I expect to be held to account by the teams, actually, that work for me.
Can we bring in Lee McDonough at this stage?
Thank you.
Thank
you, Chair. So from our perspective, I think we take the cultural issues incredibly seriously in the department, as you would expect. And I just wanted to flag 2 things. So 2 of the annual letters that go out from the department. One is to the Chair, his annual letter setting out priorities, and then Clive wrote to David Peattie about, it's called annual medium-term priorities, which are the sort of more specific delivery targets. Both of those letters specifically reference the need to keep focusing on culture, on keeping going on the journey that we have been on. And the thing that I think is a really good sign of how important NDA and the site are taking these issues, we developed collectively, actually I think it was UKGI, the shareholder that asked for this to happen, to develop this sort of balanced scorecard and the people dashboard as part of the reporting pack that comes in. And so we discuss those issues and we flag those issues up in the monthly governance meetings. So from our perspective, we think there is now more transparency about, really clear transparency about the need to address these issues, and I feel like there are positive steps being taken by the NDA and Sellafield to address the concerns. As for any organisation, it's worth saying, even our own, this is a constant journey. You can't take your foot off the pedal. You have to keep going all the time. And so, the fact that it's there highlighted in the Chair's letter and in the annual priorities letter, I think is testament to the fact that we're trying to do that.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And in the spirit of transparency, obviously, I did have some survey results, and clearly it is positive that response rates are going up from just 51% in 2021 to now some 78%. So clearly the staff, it is a more representative. I have to say some of the data was rather difficult to interpret, and I wonder if this data may also be shared already with the department, but any benchmarks, part of the value, I think, of using these external independent providers is they can benchmark you to other industries, but also a breakdown, because it's particularly important that in this context, a heavily male and white workforce, that women, anyone from ethnic minorities, and particularly because of the safety issues, that people at lower levels within the organisation have higher levels of confidence to speak up. Given that this workforce culture is not just a nice-to-do management, but is safety critical, and we don't have the ONR in front of us today, so I will direct this at you, Mr. Maxwell. What is the role of the ONR in being concerned and leaning into and understanding whether there is the right sort of culture in place to deal with safety issues? I ask this because the NAO report says that Sellafield has not taken decisive action to respond to serious issues. Sellafield has also struggled to improve how it handles conventional safety hazards, which have reoccurred in a number of areas, indicating that it is not good learning lessons on an organisational level. This is pretty damning, is it not, for a safety critical industry such as nuclear?
The ONR is responsible for regulating health and safety issues at Sellafield and at other nuclear licensed sites. That applies to conventional health and safety risks as well as the nuclear risks. At any given time, it will be focusing on different sorts of concerns, and we've already heard about some of its areas of highest scrutiny around cyber, for example, at Sellafield. My understanding is that the ONR, in carrying out that role, takes account of culture and looks at culture, because it's a standard understanding, in particular on, in construction workplaces and things like that, having the ability for people to call out and to raise issues when there are health and safety concerns is really important. It often gets, it's often correlated with people's willingness to speak out about other sorts of issues. My understanding is the ONR looks at that, and indeed that it's given a green light to that, and it hasn't identified problems in that regard. But maybe Euan will need to confirm that, because he will see.
Yeah, and perhaps we could ask the ONR to share with us how it does actually, what data it uses to reach that green rating. Thank you.
So just on that, I think it's in the middle of April, they're actually coming back to do an intervention specifically on this again. So you'll see they treat this topic like they would treat a licence condition or a system-based inspection. They'll come and they'll talk to people, they'll look at our policies, procedures, they'll get evidence, and then they'll form a view. So they're coming to redo that again. I think it's in April.
Do you want to add anything, Mr. Hutton, on the point about a learning culture?
Yes, I do. It's one of our constant journeys that we're on, and what it talks about there is that we have a really great ability at fixing problems, and then whether and then I'm not sure. So we've done a board of inquiry is our top level investigation. We've done a board of inquiry in exactly this point. So how come we can't always learn and get it to stick? And we utilise independent chair to come in and understand where we are, and we're just working our way through the recommendations from that. But we're very good at fixing problems. We aren't as great at getting it to stick. So hence a board of inquiry, our own top level investigation into how we can do that better.
Okay, so I think maybe just one final point, if I may, Chair. There's a lot here about sort of performance culture. We've sort of separately talked about, how you're motivating your staff, and I was sort of intrigued that you thought by having a deadline of 2039 would motivate your workforce. There must be...
It was the in-year targets that
right, the in-year targets, that. Fine. Yeah. I was a bit confused by that. Yeah. But yeah, sort of how you get this sense right of, safe to speak up, which you've talked about, a culture of learning and improvement, at the same time helping to make sure people are focused on performance and productivity. And I see in terms of some of the projects that have I can't remember where to quote it from, but absenteeism and lack of workforce has sometimes been a trigger. So I just, how do you see, you've been now the chief exec interim and now permanent, sort of your leadership to create a culture that will deliver all of those things?
Yeah, so when I got in the job, I kind of, as I think you're supposed to, it's my first time as a CEO, so I came to the conclusion that there were kind of 4 areas of focus that we needed to work on. One was always all about rebuilding relationships. So relationships with the regulator, relationships with the NDA, relationships with the department, with the local community and with the staff in general, because I just felt there was a disconnect. So I wanted to really drive, because if I can encourage everybody around the mission and give them the air cover and support they need to deliver that mission safely, securely, getting on, and all the rewards you get with it, and you've met some of the people, and certainly some of the people have absolutely got that. So that was the first one, rebuild relationships. Second one was a focus on the leadership and the drive, the culture of that leadership. Again, I felt there was a disconnect between my predecessor and that leadership. These things can happen. So real drive on that. And then the people. The last thing, the third thing was I called a nuclear site focus. Everything that we do at Sellafield is to drive performance on that site. safely, securely, sustainably deliver the mission, of which we have a number. We've talked a lot about retrievals today. We also receive fuel. I'll not go through the list. It says it in the report, the kind of 7 big things that we deliver on. And then the final one, which we're starting to get traction on, was increasing the pace of safe delivery. So across those things around relationships, reconnecting with the workforce, that focus on the nuclear site, and then delivery, that's how I'm trying to drive the culture of the organisation. Bearing in mind that there are some sacrosanct things in there, for example, safety, security, the ability to stop work. We call it a thing called stop, think, act, review. If you don't like what you're saying, stop, think about it, do something about it. Human performance. We work closely with the World Association of Nuclear Operators, which is a peer-led organisation with every nuclear operator in the world, and we're all trying to drive each other towards excellence, because excellence in nuclear is what we all need, because we all know if any of us get it wrong, then it's a bad day for everybody. So we utilise their skill set to help us drive to that performance outcome which I've just described.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Sarah Olney, please.
Ms. Bowyer, your turn, finally. I want to understand a bit more about the NDA's funding from the Treasury. It's rather less than you requested. What kind of impact will that have?
So we have been discussing with the Department and the Treasury our funding for the year to start next month, 25-26. And as you say, we have less than we had requested. However, with good conversations, we do have the amount that we need to make sure that the sites can continue the critical activities in a safe and secure manner. It does mean that there are difficult decisions to be made about some of the less critical aspects, but we do have sufficient. We've also started the conversations for the next 4 years of capital funding and 3 years of revenue funding. It's a good thing that we're considering a longer time period now. We've had a number of years of in-year settlements only, and in the type of business that we're in and in the long-term projects that we have, it's very difficult when you don't have that visibility. So we're looking forward to having that longer settlement, and we have constructive conversations ongoing at the moment. I can't say anything more, obviously, about where that will get us to.
Could I just very quickly add, that's a really good example of bringing the Treasury in right from the start. So they have been in the room. We've been doing challenge sessions to make sure that the full extent of the implications of funding decisions are transparent with them. And so that's been a really big, positive step as we step through a very complex spending review, given it's a multi-year spending review.
So you're confident that they have a full understanding of the challenges that you're facing and how you are approaching them, or when you're approaching them for money, what the importance of that longer term settlement is?
The information has been shared that is very transparent about, the implications and the choices and the trade-offs that need to be made when you're doing a big settlement like this.
Thank you. Mr. Hutton, just drawing on what Ms. Bowyer was saying there about the difficulties of managing an in-year settlement, what are the things that you might have been able to do differently if you'd had a little bit more time to plan?
Yeah, so since, gosh, I can't remember how long it's been now, but we've had these kind of 1 year settlements. We actually, because we anticipate that we're always going to continue to be funded at a relatively decent level, that means we're confident that everything that we've got in flight that we'll be able to deliver. The challenge comes in a period like at the moment, and as Kate said, that we've had to make some difficult decisions about what we will be able to start next year because of the reduction in funding, and that can be across the piece. But for example, there'll be a less important decommissioning activity that we can slow down because that risk profile doesn't justify it. We're still going to have to do it. It might mean that at the end of that particular, we talked about strategic tolerances, it might be at the end of it we've had to extend by a couple of years because we didn't start it this year coming. So it's things like that. But we've certainly got, in this first year, the one that we've got confirmed, we've got enough to allow us to get on and deliver all of those critical things with some things we've had to delay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to come back to you, Clive, please. And I'd particularly like to refer to paragraphs 3.19 and 320 on page 41. What I am concerned about with this whole resource issue is that we don't want just Sellafield to continue to do the safety critical things. We want them to actually go further than that and start down this path of decommissioning. Now, that paragraph does come up with some quite worrying remarks as to the sort of negotiations between Sellafield and the Treasury. For example, it says that part of HMSG's 2021 spending reviews, Sellafield agreed to reduce the number of people it applied from 11,600 to 9,100. But it then goes on to say, inadequate numbers of suitably trained staff, buildings frequently had to be shut down, there would not have been enough people to operate them safely. This had been a very rare occurrence before COVID-19 pandemic, but has since become normalised. And as I understand it, Sellafield staff is back at least to 11,600 before the Treasury demanded those cuts. So, I mean, how do we deal with this whole business about just not just maintaining the status quo, but actually getting on with the decommissioning and giving them adequate resources to do that?
Well, there are clearly choices to be made about the level of funding, and ministers need to take those decisions about the level of funding for the NDA, and then the NDA board and the Sellafield board need to decide how best to allocate the resources they're given as part of their budgets. And there are choices to be made about that, Chair. And the high levels of funding permit faster progress on some areas of decommissioning. This is not a new thing. This is, it's a thing that we see across other bits of the public estate and has gone on for a long time.
What we've seen in this report and from the questioning today, we've begun to realise how critical the obsolescence of these buildings is, and if we're not careful, we're going to land ourselves in big bills in future by having to build new buildings, which is instead of which, if we got on with that decommissioning path on that graph that I was talking about at the beginning, we might avoid some of that. So surely we may be short-term penny pinching to actually have to spend a lot more money in the future.
As I say, there are some choices to be made by ministers about where they want to put the public resources between the NDA and other uses in government.
I get that, but you're not refuting my central argument that there is a trade-off here.
When you're dealing with the sorts of assets that the NDA and Sellafield are dealing with, it's a fact of life that the amount of money you've got available is one of the factors that determines how quickly you can deal with those assets. And that influences your value for money over a longer time period.
That wasn't quite the point I was making. The point I was making was that if you don't give them resources now, they may come up to the end of the life of these buildings and have to spend many billions on producing new buildings, which might in the longer run be much more expensive than giving them sufficient assets now.
It might be poorer value for money in the longer term. The key thing is we expect that the NDA and Sellafield to work in a way which maximises value for money within the funding envelopes that they're given. They don't get to choose what the funding envelope is.
Okay. Right, we now move to Bill, who's been sitting there very patiently, and you're very welcome to this committee, Bill. I'm sorry that you've been sitting there so patiently.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Chair. It's been fascinating, as always, and thinking about it from the point of view of the wider DESNES agenda, I am struck again and again by the question that we started with, which is the target of 21-25 and returning it to a greenfield site. How essential is it to deliver that agenda? Are there alternatives? Have alternative plans been drawn up within the department which would deliver material financial savings?
We're going to have a call, won't we?
Do you want me to come in on that?
Yes.
Yeah. So look, again, there are choices to be made. At the moment, that is the plan that people are working to. I mean, it's right and proper those sorts of things are looked at, but I think at the moment returning these sites to those sorts of standing is the plan. It depends on what end uses you want to make of the sites potentially. Is probably the simplest way of putting that.
It sounds like it is possible to have an alternative.
It's certainly possible to change the plan and the strategy.
And the question follows: what sort of reduction in the cost would you envisage if that was the route?
Well, I don't think it would have an impact on some of the activities that are going on today at Sellafield. That would be my main argument. Is the sorts of hazards and risks that we've been talking about here today, about clearing out silos and swarf, ponds, would need to be done under any model.
Sure, but you've been able to put a long-term 100-year cost on it. What would be the potential alternative 100-year cost?
I don't have a figure for that.
So that modelling's not gone on at any time within the department?
It certainly hasn't gone on in the last few years.
Okay, interesting. I think my committee may well pursue that.
Well, I think the point that Bill's getting at here, unless Sellafield are given a clear remit, it's much more difficult for them to plan. And these multi-year settlements are great, but they do need to plan over a long period. And if they don't have a clear remit, they might be doing things that are unnecessary now if the longer-term remediation solution is not as exacting as it is supposed to be at the moment.
I agree with you, Chair, that knowing what the end-term plan is does matter. I don't think it makes any difference to the work that's going on the site in the next 5 or 10 years. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the scale of the remediation and decommissioning that's required under any end-use scenarios is such that those key activities would still be going on. It's a reasonable point to ask. In fact, in the short term, it's probably at least as relevant as some of the other sites that the NDA is responsible for, rather than Sellafield.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. We won't pursue that point further today, but I think it's something that we should come back to. You may want to come back to it as well. I'm sure I will. When will the geological disposal facility start accepting materials?
The current plan for the geological disposal facility would be able to take first acceptances in the late 2050s, so around 25 years from now, which is a hell of a long time away, I know that, but in line with international benchmarks, it's broadly in line with what other countries have done. It is the internationally accepted best use now of storage and disposal of particularly highly radioactive material. And we're working through, in line with government policy and the department, the steps to achieve the two criteria, namely a willing community and appropriate geology.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And given some of the uncertainties that we have been hearing for the last 3 hours, what certainty can you give us that those plans will be on track in the coming years?
Well, it's, as I say, it's 25 years into the future. It's our current best judgment of how long it will take based on international benchmarks and the particular areas. I think until we know specifically where the headworks will be, which community will host the GDF, until then it'll be difficult to give a precise date, but it should be much clearer in the coming months and next couple of years.
I think I'd refer to two really important things in the short term, actually, that need to be got through. The first is the government's been really clear that this has got to be a consent-based approach to the GDF, so it's about finding an appropriate community that wants to have a GDF in it. The second thing is identifying the right geology, and that is a complex technical piece of work that requires extensive surveying of a sort that's quite unique to these sorts of projects. So both of those sorts of two activities need to be carried out before you can decide on the site. And that is the key next big milestone that's required around this.
Yes, I couldn't help but notice, David Peattie, that you said late 2050s and then you said you used 25 years. By my calculations, that takes us into 2060. But nevertheless, how will you demonstrate over the coming years that your plans are on track?
Well, we'll be tracking milestones and metrics as we would with any major programme. So we'll have a clear set of targets again, looking out in the years for borehole assessment.
You will have, or do you already have some of these?
We have some of those, but it is, as you'd appreciate, critically dependent on the specific location in the UK for where we build the GDF, because the geologies are very different for instance, on the East Coast and the West Coast. And the time for test boreholes, the time for getting the communities comfortable can vary. But we have a dedicated team in one of our subsidiary companies whose day job is to plan for the GDF, and they're getting on with it.
Just to add, I know it's a boring component, but there is a programme board that oversees this programme, which has all the relevant players on. So we do sort of track, the sort of progress, and as Clive and David have said, consent-based approach is a really crucial part of the policy. And sometimes it takes longer than you might think to move those things forward. I know that, like in Sweden, and I only know this because I visited the site in Sweden, they spent at least 20 odd years on community engagement before they could progress. So I don't think this project is out of sync with what we see more broadly globally. These things take time because it's a really significant decision.
What lessons are you learning from Sweden or anywhere else?
Well, actually, I mean, the lesson from Sweden was that it's absolutely crucial to get consent up front. Because if you don't, then you just have trouble down the line, and they've invested huge amounts of time, effort, engagements, community benefits, supports, and they did reach a conclusion which was positive and progressing. And Finland as well. So we can see these things because it is a major decision for a community to take these on.
How will you decide that you have community consent?
I think there's a test of public support.
Which is what?
Well, David might know the details, but there is a formal part.
There will be a formal test of public support, which, for instance, could take the form of a survey of the local population, the communities that will be directly affected. Again, only when you know precisely where it is will we be able to exercise that.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything in the UK comparable where consent has been demonstrated? I mean, that may be quite a hard question to ask, but any major project where you think there's a good model on demonstrating consent?
I can't think of one. If I can think of one, I'll write to you as an example.
Yeah.
Mr. Maxwell, I mean, we've been talking about these two issues for the last 10 years. It doesn't seem to me that we're any further forward than we were 10 years ago. Indeed, in fact, I was always understanding that this facility might be available in the 2050s. It now seems to have gone out to 2060. We've received a lot of evidence for this inquiry that actually the local community really feel the benefit of Sellafield in terms of jobs and investment and so on. So I would have thought that an exercise seeing whether the consent of the people around Sellafield in Cumbria would be favourable towards this facility could be fairly easily done. Whether that's got the right geological thing, but I mean, consent, as you both, Lee and Clive have said, is very, very important, whereas there isn't, I don't think, or it would be much more difficult to get consent in Lincolnshire, although the geology might be better. So surely it's time that we did some work on this and try and come up with at least a pathway to how we're going to actually implement this thing, rather than just sort of keep talking about it.
There is extensive work going on at the moment. Firstly, I think, I might be wrong, but I understand the government indicated its favour, its support for GDF in 2018, not a decade ago. There's been extensive work going on with local communities to try to understand and build that sort of support. There's also been a lot of work going on now about the setting up of the projects and the procurement of the technical services to do the borehole drilling, for example, to understand the technical geology. You can do the geology surveys at a certain level, but you need to get the much more detailed, granular information before you can be absolutely sure about the viability of a particular site. So David can say more about that, but there's a lot of work going on at the moment in the NWS operating company.
Yeah, just to be clear, there's a huge amount of work, Sir Geoffrey, underway on developing the GDF. Areas of focus have been identified. There's community investment, community engagement extensively. We did launch the sort of request for interested parties over the last couple of years. And we're close now, I think, to be able to understand, as you rightly point out, the relative benefits of east and west, community support versus geology, which is the key question. Look, there's a team in NWS, one of our subsidiaries, who's working on this day in, day out.
Sounds as though to get core samples of that depth is going to involve some quite major engineering. Are the resources there at the moment to do that? Otherwise, we're just talking in space. We're not talking in realities.
Obviously, for site surveys, including borehole drilling, yeah, the plans are in place for that. We're bringing forward a business case precisely for that.
Can either of you give us any idea of the sort of timetable of that?
Well, I think we start again 2050s, probably the late 50s. That's the order of when we expect first emplacement of the highly radioactive material. So working back from that is how we're building the capital project to build the facility, and then ahead of that it's about doing all the assessments and prep and planning and for it. And then the very early phase, which is in the next couple of years, is to do that detailed assessment around the geology, which will include a number of boreholes. The number will depend on where precisely the facility is built, the east or west coast.
Are you saying that you are, because it keeps shifting it between 2050, 2060, 2080, I'm hearing all sorts of dates.
Well, the 2050s, which...
2050s,
okay. 25th, that decade, right, which obviously starts 25 years from now and ends in 2060.
30 years. I don't know how long this thing will take to build, but I guess quite a long time. So planning for it needs to be... there needs to be a continual programme to do that, otherwise we're not going to get it ready.
That's right, and there is. I want to give the committee confidence there is that programme in development, and as Lee rightly said, we're working closely with international partners on this, in Finland and Canada, who we speak with regularly. They've just identified their site, so we're not the first here to be doing this, and I think it's important to learn the lessons from other countries.
Clive, I'll let you have the
I'll come back. The point that the progress requires on community support, that's government policy. It requires on identifying the correct geology, and it also, Chair, as you mentioned, requires the right funding to be in place to be able to pursue those things, and that's over a long time period.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. This is clearly one of the country's biggest projects, potentially most dangerous. So I'm going to be looking forward, as Chair, very much to receiving that graph, how we do this in the next 100 years, and what are the steps and the investment needed to do that. And we will be keeping a very close eye on this project. So can I thank all our witnesses very much indeed for coming today. It's been a long session, but it needed to be because there was a lot of ground to cover. So an uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days. The committee will consider evidence provided and will produce a report with recommendations in due course. Thank you all very much. Order.